Well, good morning. Happy to answer any questions. I hope that all of you heard how important the mental health treatment and addiction treatment are to me, and how important it is for our state to stand up and make sure that we're providing those services to people who are so in need.
You mentioned the public option wouldn't cost people money, but that it would be cheaper than traditional insurance, I think you were implying. How is that possible? How is it cheaper, and also the state's not giving a subsidy to that public option?
Right, so people will be buying into the Medicaid system. That's what it is. That's how the public option works. And when I say buying into, at cost, at the state's cost. Private health insurance plans have a lot of profit built into them, as you know. And so this is obviously the state's Medicaid system. The state's health insurance system does not have profit built into it at the top level. And so it's a much cheaper plan. In fact, we put out information about it that shows that you can cut the cost of your health care coverage by a couple $1,000s if you take the public option. It also provides a competitor for private plans, so it'll force private health insurance companies to be more competitive on their prices.
Is that based on the federal government kicking in?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we would have to go seek Medicaid waiver if we wanted to have, let's say, ACA dollars, particular ACA dollars that could subsidize somebody, but it does not require that. In fact, somebody would simply buy into, at cost, that Medicaid system. So whatever it costs on an individual basis, that's what somebody would pay for the plan. And they would not be eliminated by virtue of a pre-existing condition, which is something, as you know, President Trump has tried to push.
How do you respond to the governor yesterday? One of his primary lines of attack was saying that you don't care about corruption. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think the governor, of course, is trying to distract from his complete failure over 3.5 years to get anything done for the state of Illinois. So here he is in a desperate move in the last, what are we at, 2 months of the campaign, to try to reset and talk about something new, go on the attack, lie about my record. The fact is that every day I think he's proven that he's a failure, and that speech was actually a conglomeration of admission that he has been an utter and complete failure to the state.
What do you say then to, what does it say about your value of the press if you wouldn't go to the Chicago Tribune's debate editorial board meeting this morning? The governor yesterday attacked you, said you don't take questions or sit down with interviews like that. Why didn't you go to that?
Well, as you know, the governor, while he was saying that, refused to talk to the press before or after.
But you talk to us all the time. I mean, almost every day.
And so do I. Yesterday, there was a press gaggle that I spoke to in the afternoon. Yesterday, I gave a one-on-one interview in Springfield. Yesterday, I was at the State Journal Register at their editorial board meeting. So, I answer questions every day for reporters. I'm glad to do that, and I think we've been very upfront about that.
Why single out the Tribune? Why single them out? Do you have a political disagreement with them?
No, the truth is that we put forward 3 dates for debates very early. In fact, the governor didn't respond for a long time. And then finally, the governor agreed to our 3 debates. So those are the debates that are on the calendar, and those are the ones that we're doing. And that'll be an opportunity for people to see us on stage, side by side.
Hi, JB. You were an early investor in Facebook. Can you talk about, are you still an investor? Can you talk about the evolution of Facebook this past 6 months or so, and what's been involved with Russia being involved and everything?
We made an investment a long time ago before Facebook was public. I wouldn't call it very early, but certainly earlier than anybody on the public market. And we sold that interest that we bought before it was public, after it went public. So we're not, that's not part of our business portfolio. I have opinions about what Facebook has done. I think that whether by omission or commission, Facebook has been a platform that has enabled people to manipulate, the electoral system and opinions, and I think Facebook needs to be more upfront in making changes. They have made changes. We've seen it in our own digital department. People have to disclose now where their political ad money is coming from. That is to say, they have to disclose that an ad is from a particular committee. So you can look up now and see campaigns spending on Facebook like you couldn't before. So that's a good development, but I do think that the federal government is going to have to look at, how is it that we can avoid the intrusions that I think are occurring on people's privacy, not just by Facebook. Privacy is so important for us to address as a society, as social media has become pervasive, as everybody's online. Protecting the consumer, protecting the people of Illinois is going to be a priority for me, and because I've spent a reasonable amount of time in the tech world. I know enough about it and know the people who can help us set policy for the state.
You talked a fair amount about state funding for social services, addiction treatment today. You face some criticism for not talking about specifics of your tax plan, how that might be paid for. Can you give some specifics today about how your graduated income tax plan would work?
Well, there are some basic principles that are what progressive income tax or fair tax system, a graduated income tax system, are based upon. And the basic principles are that here in Illinois, the vast majority of the people in the state are getting overtaxed and ought to get a tax break. That people who are child care workers and nurses and construction workers shouldn't pay the same rate of tax, of income tax, as people who are much wealthier, people like Bruce Rauner and me. And so we need to make the system more fair. If you look at the total tax burden on taxpayers today, as a percent of their incomes, people at the lowest end, people at the bottom 20%, and actually all the way through the middle and upper middle income levels, they're paying a much higher rate of tax with the full tax burden of property taxes and sales taxes and so on, and they're paying at the top end a lower rate. So if you've seen any of the statistics, it's as much as 13% on people in the bottom 20% of taxpayers and 6% on people in the very top. So I just want to make it fairer, and I think the best way to do that is to reduce the burden on property taxes by implementing a fair tax system so that people at the upper end will pay a higher rate than people at the lower end. Those are basic principles. We'll have to go negotiate with the legislature and make sure that we're including Republicans and Democrats. They'll have to vote on it, so the people's representatives will vote on it, and then it'll go to a referendum of the people of Illinois. And so with all of those processes, lots of opportunity for people to have input about what that plan should look like.
Nurses on average make about $80,000 or so in Illinois. Are you saying people at that income level are going to see a tax cut, $80,000?
What I am saying is that people at the top end should pay a higher rate than people who are at the bottom or in the middle. And so again, where the cutoffs are, where the plan comes out is going to be a process of negotiation and working with people on both sides of the aisle. Republicans who don't like the plan, who don't like the idea of a progressive income tax, who don't like that idea, can come to the table and give their views about, well, if you had a progressive income tax, what should those rates be? Now, I think it's important to incorporate everybody's views.
You hit Bruce Rauner for failing to lead and clearly state or articulate policies that he would drive. Why can't you set that example and lead the charge, tell people what that rate should be? You're going to have to introduce a budget, right, to the
Sure.
legislature. What would that look like?
Sure, but remember, Bruce Rauner's failure has been that he doesn't tell you anything about, for example, how would you implement a property tax freeze?
That wasn't the question. I'm asking what the line would be for who gets a tax cut in
I
your
understand,
budget
but
proposal.
You're also referring to Bruce Rauner and his leadership. I'm saying there's no leadership when someone is saying that they want a property tax freeze, but then they propose a budget that would raise property taxes at the local level. What is that? I mean, why is nobody asking questions about that? Why is it that why is nobody continuing to ask? And I also think that you ought to ask the question, why did Bruce Rauner propose that the federal government should allow Illinois to declare bankruptcy as a solution to our problems? I don't think that's a good idea. It's a terrible idea, in fact. It would cost the taxpayers of the state of Illinois tens of billions of dollars to do that, we would end up, frankly, over the long haul, it would be horrible. Think about what happens in bankruptcy. Your rates of interest go up. People don't want to lend to you. Your state, essentially grinds to a halt for lack of cash flow. Those are all things we have to avoid. That's why you're going to want somebody who's being responsible about it.
So you mentioned to Cranes that you would raise the pension payments sooner. You would step those up sooner. How soon and by how much? You mentioned cash flow could be a problem. How quickly do you raise pension payments?
Again, there are multiple plans that have been put forward. One of them is this plan that you're articulating. That plan.
That was your plan.
No, that's a plan that was put forward by an organization. You can look it up. And that plan would call for payments. It's just like your own home. If you'd put a amortization schedule on your own home in that looks like this, and you couldn't manage the budget at some point in the future, how would you deal with that for your own home? You'd pay in earlier on your principal payments and try to flatten out those payments going forward. That's a plan that seems like it would work for the state of Illinois, because remember, let's not talk anymore about not paying the pensions. We've been ordered by the Supreme Court to pay the pensions. And it is also, I believe, a moral obligation. When you make a promise to people on pensions, you got to step up to the plate on them. And so that's why I believe you got to step up, and we got to look at all of the alternatives, and none of them should be bankrupting the state like Bruce Rauner suggested.
But by how much would you raise the pension payment? In your first term, in your first 4 years, by how much? To flatten that out, you have to raise it by $5-10 billion a year, right?
Again, this is a plan that was put forward by another organization that did the economic analysis on it. It's called the CTBA.
You're embracing
that's
it.
One example. Well, I'm giving you an example of how you might solve it. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't address this pension plan by saying that you're going to pay for it, then you're just ignoring the problem. I mean, you've got to step up and say, we're going to have a lot of ideas about how to make sure we're paying the pensions that are owed, because it's not an alternative to bankrupt the state, and that's what Bruce Rauner wants to do.
If you can't pass a progressive income tax until
Mike, can you let
2021.
she ask a question? No, I just want to. Go, keep
Oh,
going,
sorry.
keep going.
If you have to raise the income tax, progressive income tax in 2021, that's like 2-3 years off from now, what do you do to raise revenue in the meantime? Do you change the income tax where it is now? You've mentioned before you might raise that income tax. Is that something you're ruling out, or would you consider that?
No, I think that I have talked about, for example, some of the alternative revenue sources that we can go to. An example might be, and I favor this, legalizing marijuana. And that now, by some estimates, could be as much as $1 billion to the state. Now remember, Bruce Rauner wasted $1 billion by not having a balanced budget. So we're going to get that $1 billion back. And going forward, we're going to get $1 billion, I hope, as much as $1 billion by legalizing marijuana. Another is legalizing sports betting in the state. There's also been a proposal by Senator Bill Brady to expand gaming in the state. So these are all things that could serve as revenue sources. Shia?
I'm switching gears, sorry, though I love the sports betting stuff. Have you talked to Jeff Bezos about Amazon?
I have not spoken with Jeff Bezos about Amazon, but as you know, I've spent years putting Chicago in a position that it could get companies to move to the state, companies like Amazon, other technology-oriented companies, by virtue of my work not only at 1871, but remember, way before 1871, Chicago needed to build the infrastructure that was necessary for us to have a technology economy for startups. And so, having been involved in the Chicagoland Entrepreneurial Center and its startup, having been involved in the startup of a number of seed funds in the city, and also working to found the first big accelerator in the city, which is now called Techstars Chicago. Those are all pieces of building, and I talked in there in the other room about a holistic view of how you solve a problem. How do you make Chicago a hub of technology development and startup activity, and thereby attract companies to the city? And so that basis, that foundation, is what I believe companies like Amazon and others look to Chicago for now, and I'm proud of the work that I did to create that foundation.
Would you pick up where Rahm has been trying to bring companies to Chicago? Is that something you would pick up?
Well, I'll pick up the pieces of the failed governor who hasn't done enough to attract businesses to the state. In fact, he's badmouthed the state everywhere he goes, not just here in the state, but inviting surrounding governors to go on TV badmouthing the state, and he travels around the world, in fact, badmouthing the state. You want somebody who's going to be an advocate, bringing jobs and businesses to the state, and an advocate, very importantly, for homegrown businesses. Because I know it's hard to help a lot of small businesses get started, and that's why many public officials don't do a lot of work in that area, but that's something I know a lot about. And believe strongly, when you look at a lot of the big companies that are here in the state today, many of them were founded right here as little companies, small companies, and they grew to 50 people and 100 and then 1,000 and thousands of people. And I'm proud of the fact that I've helped a number of those companies get started, new ones. But we need to help lots of them all across the state, not just in the city of Chicago, but around our universities across the state too. So I put forward a plan for that.
Could we just get clarity on one point, something you mentioned earlier? Do you favor legalizing sports gambling? You mentioned legalizing.
I do think it's something we need to consider. Just looking at a revenue alternative, I think that it's something that, again, other states have legalized sports betting, and it has been a revenue generator for them. Again, it's got to be regulated. We've got to make sure that we've got the right laws in place for it, but it's an important thing to consider.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.